charity ride, families laughing, barbecue smoke drifting through summer air, and an 11-year-old boy sitting at a registration table who just spotted something that made his blood go cold. A faded crimson symbol hidden inside a stranger's jacket. A symbol that should not exist anymore, attached to a ghost organization responsible for bloody weapons routes that once left bodies in shallow graves across 3 states. Nobody believed him. The cops smiled and walked away. But one man didn't smile. One scarred, silent biker president named Gideon Cross looked into that boy's eyes and saw something he recognized. The same desperate fear he once ignored in himself, the night it cost him a brother. This is a story about what happens when the most dangerous men in the room are the only ones willing to protect the innocent. If this one grabs you, ride with us all the way to the end. Hit that like button, drop a comment, tell us what city you're watching from. Let's go. The registration table sat crooked on the gravel, one leg shorter than the others, shimmed with a folded beer coaster that kept slipping out every time someone leaned against the edge. Cal Turner had replaced it 3 times already. He was 11 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in uneven strands his mother never had time to cut properly. He wore a second-hand flannel 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and sneakers held together with duct tape on the left sole. He didn't complain about any of it. He never complained about anything. That was the thing about Cal. He watched. He cataloged. He filed things away in a mind that ran too fast for a kid who still couldn't reach the top shelf without a chair. The 9th annual Veterans and Families Charity Ride was the Iron Covenant MC's biggest event of the year. 47 registered riders so far, plus families, plus volunteers from the VFW Hall 3 miles down Route 9, plus a barbecue crew that had been smoking brisket since 4 in the morning. The clubhouse parking lot was packed with chrome and leather and sun-faded American steel. Harley engines crackled and popped as bikes rolled in through the front gate, their exhaust mixing with hickory smoke and the sharp sweetness of kettle corn from a stand someone had dragged out near the fence line. Kids chased each other between the rows of motorcycles while their parents signed liability waivers and pinned on name tags. It looked like every small-town summer fundraiser Cal had ever seen. Noise and dust and people pretending the world outside didn't exist for one afternoon. Raina Turner stood behind her son, sorting registration packets into alphabetical piles that kept getting knocked over by the wind. She was 34 but looked 42. Tired in the way that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of making decisions that all led to the same dead end. She'd been volunteering with the Iron Covenant's community outreach for almost 2 years now, not because she believed in motorcycle clubs, but because Gideon Cross had hired her to do part-time bookkeeping for the clubhouse when no one else in Cedar Bluff would give her work after the divorce. The divorce that left her with Cal, a rusted Honda Civic with a check engine light that never turned off, and a reputation she hadn't earned. Cal liked the bikers. Not in the way other kids liked them, the leather and the noise and the dangerous look of it all. He liked them because they didn't talk to him like he was stupid. They didn't ruffle his hair or ask him what grade he was in or tell him to go play. They treated him like a short adult who happened to be sitting at their table. Rooster, the club's sergeant-at-arms, had taught him to identify motorcycle engines by sound alone. Dutch, the road captain, let him help check tire pressure before group rides. And Gideon never said much of anything to Cal, but he nodded at him every morning like they had an understanding. That understanding was simple. Watch everything. Say something when it matters. It was 1:15 when the men arrived. 3 of them. They came in a black Dodge Ram with no plates visible from the registration angle, which Cal noticed because he'd been counting license plates from different states to pass the time between sign-ups. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, work boots, plain dark t-shirts, but their jackets were leather, and the leather was wrong. Not wrong in a way most people would catch. Wrong in the way the cuts were stitched. Wrong in the weight of them. These weren't fashion jackets or weekend warrior gear. These were built to conceal. Cal had spent enough time around the Iron Covenant to know the difference between a jacket you wore to look tough and a jacket you wore because you needed the extra layer between your body and whatever you were carrying underneath. The tallest one, mid-40s, jaw like a brick, eyes that scanned the crowd with mechanical precision, walked past the registration table without stopping. He didn't sign in. He didn't take a name tag. He just walked through the gate like he owned the air around him. The second man followed 3 steps behind, hands in his jacket pockets, head tilted slightly left as though he was listening for something specific beneath the music and the engine noise. The third stayed near the truck, leaning against the tailgate, watching the perimeter. Cal's stomach tightened. He told himself he was being paranoid. His mom said he did this sometimes, saw patterns that weren't there, connected dots that didn't belong to the same picture. His 5th grade teacher had called it hypervigilance during a parent conference and recommended counseling that Raina couldn't afford. But Cal didn't think he was being paranoid. He thought he was being accurate. He kept watching. The tallest man stopped near the barbecue pit, accepting a plate from one of the volunteers with a nod that was too practiced, too smooth. His jacket shifted when he reached for the plate, and for exactly 1.5 seconds, the left interior panel folded open. Cal saw it. A patch, not sewn onto the outside like club colors. Stitched on the inside lining, hidden, deliberately concealed. Faded crimson thread forming a shape Cal had seen once before. In a box of old photographs Rooster had left on the clubhouse bar 6 months ago. Photographs from a chapter history that nobody talked about anymore. A coiled serpent eating its own tail, threaded through a broken chain link. Cal's hands went still on the registration clipboard. His mouth dried out completely. He blinked twice and looked again, but the jacket had fallen closed. The man was eating brisket now, laughing at something one of the volunteers said, looking for all the world like a friendly stranger enjoying a summer afternoon. Then the signal happened. The second man had drifted toward the east fence, 40 feet from his partner. He stopped, pulled out a phone, held it to his ear like he was taking a call. But his left hand dropped to his side, and his fingers moved. 3 taps against his thigh. A pause, then a flat palm pressed briefly against the fence post. The man at the barbecue pit didn't look over, but his posture changed, a fractional shift in his shoulders. An answer. Cal had watched enough military documentaries and spent enough time around veterans to know what a nonverbal confirmation looked like. He stood up from the registration table so fast his chair scraped backward across the gravel. "Mom." Raina looked up from her packets. "What's wrong?" "Those guys. The 3 that just came in. Something's not right." Raina's first instinct was the same instinct every overworked single mother had when her kid said something alarming in public. Minimize, redirect, keep the peace. But she'd learned something in the past 2 years of watching her son sit quietly among men twice his size and 3 times his age. Cal didn't raise alarms for attention. He raised them because he'd already processed more information in 30 seconds than most adults processed in an hour. "Show me," she said. Cal pointed to the tall man at the barbecue pit, then to the second man near the east fence, then to the truck at the perimeter. 3 of them, no plates on the truck that I can see, concealed patches inside the jackets. Hand signals. The patch, "Mom, I've seen it before, in Rooster's old photos, the ones from the box he never put away." Raina felt something cold slide down her spine. She didn't know what a coiled serpent and a broken chain link meant, but she knew what fear looked like on her son's face, and she knew the difference between a child's imagination and a child who had learned too young to trust his own eyes, because the adults around him had consistently failed to trust them for him. "Stay here," she said. "Don't move. Don't look at them." She walked across the parking lot toward the Cedar Bluff police cruiser parked near the front gate. Deputy Harlan Webb sat in the driver's seat with the window down, sipping iced tea from a styrofoam cup, monitoring the event the way he monitored everything in Cedar Bluff, with one eye open and both ears closed. "Deputy Webb." Raina kept her voice calm. "My son noticed some men who came in without registering. They're carrying concealed patches and using hand signals. I think you should check them out." Webb looked at her over the rim of his cup. He had a face built for dismissal, thick eyebrows that naturally arranged themselves into skepticism, a mouth that defaulted to a patronizing half-smile. He knew Raina Turner. Everyone in Cedar Bluff knew Raina Turner, the woman whose husband left her for a waitress in Billings, who now did bookkeeping for a motorcycle club because no respectable business would hire her. Your son noticed concealed patches, Webb repeated. Your 11-year-old son. Yes. At a motorcycle event, full of people wearing patches. These aren't club patches on the outside. They're hidden, inside the jacket lining. Webb took another sip of his tea. Ma'am, we've got about 60 bikers here today, half of them with military backgrounds, most of them carrying knives they think I don't know about. If I investigated every suspicious-looking leather jacket, I'd be here until Christmas, he smiled. The patronizing one. I appreciate you keeping an eye out. Tell your boy he's doing a great job. Raina stared at him for 3 seconds longer than was comfortable for either of them. Then she turned and walked away. She didn't go back to the registration table. She walked past the barbecue pit, past the kettle corn stand, past the rows of gleaming motorcycles, and into the clubhouse through the side door that was always propped open with a cinder block during events. The interior was dim and cool, smelling of stale coffee, leather conditioner, and the permanent ghost of cigarette smoke that had soaked into the wood paneling over decades. The bar ran along the left wall, its surface scarred with initials and ring stains, and one long gouge that Rooster claimed came from a knife fight in 1997, but that Dutch insisted was from a dropped bottle of Jack Daniels. Gideon Cross sat at the far end of the bar, alone. He was 53 years old, built like a man who had once been powerful and was now simply hard, the muscle compacted, the joints stiff, the hands oversized and scarred across every knuckle. His beard was gray and trimmed close, his hair pulled back in a short ponytail that exposed a jagged scar running from his left temple to the hinge of his jaw. He wore a plain black t-shirt beneath his cut, the Iron Covenant patch across the back, President's flash on the chest. His boots were scuffed down to the steel toe. He was drinking black coffee from a ceramic mug that said, "World's Okayest Dad," a mug his daughter had given him before she stopped speaking to him 4 years ago. He looked up when Raina entered, didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked. Cal saw something, Raina said. No preamble, no softening. She'd learned that Gideon didn't respond to softening. 3 men, black Dodge Ram, no visible plates, concealed patches inside their jackets. Hand signals in the crowd. Cal says the patch matches something from Rooster's old photographs, a serpent, a broken chain. The coffee mug stopped halfway to Gideon's mouth. For exactly 4 seconds, nothing in the room moved. The clock above the bar ticked. A fly buzzed against the window screen. Outside, a child screamed with laughter, and a Harley engine barked to life somewhere near the gate. Gideon set the mug down. The ceramic made no sound against the bar top. He had placed it with the kind of controlled precision that came from decades of making sure his hands never revealed what his mind was processing. A serpent eating its own tail, he said, not a question, through a broken chain link. That's what Cal described. Red thread, faded, inside the left panel. Raina's breath caught. You know what it is? Gideon didn't answer immediately. He stared at the bar top the way a man stares at a grave he thought he'd finished visiting. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to a register that Raina had never heard from him before. Not angry, not afraid, but heavy, like the words had been buried under years of scar tissue, and he was pulling them out one by one with his bare hands. The Crimson Circuit, weapons pipeline, ran guns up from the border through 6 states for almost a decade, military-grade hardware, not street trash, the real thing. Armor-piercing rounds, modified receivers, suppressors that didn't exist on any registry. They moved product through charity events, community fundraisers, church picnics, anything with crowds and families, because nobody searches a family event. Nobody questions a stranger at a barbecue. He paused. The fly hit the window screen again. We thought they were gone. Everyone thought they were gone. ATF said they dismantled the network 7 years ago, arrested the leadership, sealed the routes. But, Raina said. Gideon looked at her. In his eyes, she saw something she had never seen in the eyes of a man this dangerous. Not rage, not calculation, but grief. Old grief. The kind that doesn't fade because it was never properly mourned. But 7 years ago, the night before the ATF raid, I got a call from a brother, Darren Voss. He'd been tracking the circuit on his own for months. Said he had proof they were using our charity ride, this exact event, as a staging point. Said there were men in the crowd with hidden patches. Said he'd seen hand signals. Said we needed to move. The clock ticked. I told him to wait. Told him we'd handle it in the morning. Told him the ATF had it covered. Another tick. They found Darren's bike on the shoulder of Route 9 at 6 a.m. the next morning. Engine still warm. His helmet was on the handlebars. His jacket was folded on the seat. Darren was gone. They never found him. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room the way water fills a basement. Slowly, completely, with no place left to breathe. Gideon, Raina said quietly. I ignored the signs once. His voice was barely above a whisper now, because I thought someone else would handle it, because I thought the system would work, because I told myself a brother was being paranoid. He pushed the coffee mug aside and stood. The bar stool didn't scrape. He rose like a man who had been sitting with this weight for 7 years and had just been given a reason to finally stand. That boy of yours saw what Darren saw, and this time, nobody's going to tell him he's wrong. He walked to the side door and stepped onto the gravel. The afternoon sun hit his face, and he didn't squint. He stood there for a moment, scanning the crowd with the same mechanical precision Cal had noticed in the tall stranger. Except Gideon's scan was different. It was protective, not predatory. He was counting his people, locating his brothers, mapping the geometry of a space he might need to defend in the next few hours. Then he lifted 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled, one sharp note pitched beneath the music and the engine noise, a frequency only ears trained to hear it would catch. Rooster appeared from behind the barbecue pit within 15 seconds. Dutch materialized from somewhere near the east fence. Monk, the quiet one, the one who never spoke above a murmur, and who Cal once watched reassemble an entire engine with his eyes closed, stepped out of the garage bay, wiping his hands on a rag. Bishop, the newest patch holder, young and hard, and still learning to control the anger that had followed him home from 2 tours in Afghanistan, came around the corner of the clubhouse with a cigarette between his lips that he hadn't bothered to light. They gathered around Gideon in a loose semicircle. No one asked why they had been called. The whistle was enough. We have a problem, Gideon said. He kept his voice low, his posture relaxed, his face unreadable. Anyone watching from the crowd would have seen 5 men having a casual conversation near the side door. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming. He told them what Cal had seen. He told them about the patches. He told them about the hand signals. He told them about the Crimson Circuit. Rooster's face changed first. He was the oldest member besides Gideon, 59, barrel-chested, with a white beard stained yellow at the corners from 4 decades of unfiltered camels. He'd been there 7 years ago. He'd known Darren Voss. He'd helped search Route 9 for 3 days straight, sleeping in ditches, drinking gas station coffee until his hands shook, and he'd been the one to finally ride Darren's bike back to the clubhouse because no one else could bring themselves to touch it. How sure? Rooster asked. 1 word too many for the question he was really asking. The boy described the serpent and the chain without being told what to look for, Gideon said. He's never seen the full symbol. He doesn't know what it means. He just knows what he saw. Rooster looked toward the registration table. Cal was sitting exactly where Raina had told him to stay, hands flat on the clipboard, eyes still tracking the 3 strangers with the patient focus of a kid who had learned that adults would fail him, and the only reliable defense was his own attention. Okay, Rooster said. That was all. The transformation was immediate and invisible. No orders were shouted. No weapons were drawn. No families were alarmed. The Iron Covenant simply shifted, the way a river shifts when it encounters a stone, the water dividing and reforming around the obstacle without ever breaking its surface. Dutch moved toward the front gate and positioned himself near the entrance, arms crossed, leaning against a fence post like he was just enjoying the sun. But his eyes were on the black Dodge Ram and the man leaning against its tailgate. Monk drifted toward the east fence, tool bag over his shoulder, looking for all the world like he was checking the fence line for repairs. Bishop took a post near the barbecue pit, accepting a plate of food and eating slowly, his back to the wall, his sight line covering both the tall stranger and the interior entrance to the clubhouse. Rooster stayed with Gideon. "If there's circuit," Rooster said quietly, "this isn't the play. They're not here to hit the event. Too many witnesses, too many cameras on phones." Gideon nodded. "Reconnaissance. Mapping the layout, counting exits, timing the crowd, figuring out when the lot empties." "For what?" Rooster pulled out a cigarette and lit it with a match he struck on his thumbnail. The flame reflected in his eyes for a moment, then died. "The same thing it was always for, a transfer, after dark. When the families are gone and the lot is empty, and the only people left are us." Gideon looked at the parking lot, at the chrome and the leather and the children chasing each other between bikes that weighed 700 pounds and cost more than their parents' houses, at the veterans lining up for barbecue with paper plates and the quiet pride of men who had survived things they would never discuss over brisket, at Raina Turner, who was walking back toward the registration table now, putting her hand on her son's shoulder, bending down to whisper something in his ear, at Cal, who nodded once and didn't take his eyes off the strangers. "Call Harlan," Gideon said. "The old number, not the dispatch line." Rooster raised an eyebrow. "Harlan's been off the grid for 2 years. Last I heard he was somewhere in Montana, raising goats and pretending the world didn't exist." "He'll answer for this." "You sure?" "Darren was his brother-in-law." Rooster took a long drag on his cigarette and said nothing for 10 seconds. Then he pulled out a phone that was neither new nor smart and walked toward the garage bay, where the signal was better and the walls were thick enough to swallow sound. Gideon went back inside the clubhouse. He walked behind the bar, reached beneath the counter, and pulled out a wooden box he hadn't opened in 7 years. The wood was dark with age and oil. The latch was brass, tarnished green. He set it on the bar top and stared at it the way you stare at a door you locked for good reason and now have to open because the thing you locked inside has started knocking. He opened the box. Inside, lying on a bed of faded red velvet, was a single photograph. Darren Voss, 31 years old in the picture. Lean, dark-eyed, with a grin that made you trust him before he said a word. He was sitting on his Harley in front of this clubhouse, this exact parking lot, one arm raised in a wave that could have been hello or goodbye, depending on when you looked at it. Beneath the photograph was a folded piece of paper. Gideon didn't unfold it. He didn't need to. He'd read it enough times to know every word. Darren's final notes, names, dates, routes, a map drawn in pencil on the back of a gas station receipt, everything he'd tried to tell them the night before he disappeared. Everything Gideon had told him could wait until morning. He closed the box. He didn't put it back under the bar. He left it sitting on the counter where he could see it, where it would watch him the way the dead watched the living. Not with accusation, but with patience, waiting for the moment when the debt would finally be honored. Outside, the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the tree line. The shadows from the motorcycles stretched longer across the gravel. The music shifted from classic rock to something slower, sadder, a steel guitar crying over a drumbeat that sounded like a heart running out of time. The families kept laughing. The children kept playing. The barbecue smoke kept rising into a sky that was turning the color of a bruise, deep purple at the edges, yellow-gray at the center, the kind of sky that promised either a storm or a sunset, and gave no indication which one you were going to get. Cal sat at the registration table and watched the 3 strangers move through the crowd like currents beneath calm water. The tall one had finished his plate and was now standing near the west exit, studying the gate mechanism. The second man had left the east fence and was walking the perimeter of the parking lot, counting something on his fingers. Spaces, maybe, or distances. The third hadn't moved from the truck. And in the clubhouse, alone at the bar, Gideon Cross picked up his phone and dialed a number he had sworn he would never use again, a number that connected to a man who existed in no federal database, answered to no agency, and owed Gideon exactly one favor from a night in Fallujah that neither of them had ever spoken about to anyone. The phone rang 3 times. A voice answered. No greeting, no name. just breathing. "It's Cross," Gideon said. Silence. "The circuit is back. They're here, at the ride. Same playbook, same symbols. 7 years later, same exact staging ground." More silence. Then a single word that carried more weight than a full sentence from anyone else. "When?" "Tonight. After dark." That's my read. The breathing on the other end changed. Slower, deeper. The kind of controlled inhale that came before a decision that couldn't be undone. "I need to know something first," the voice said. "Before I move. Before I call anyone. I need to know this isn't about Darren." Gideon looked at the wooden box on the bar, at the photograph he couldn't see but could feel through the closed lid like heat through a wall. "Everything is about Darren," he said. "But that's not why I'm calling. There are 60 families in that parking lot right now. Kids, veterans, people who came here because they thought this was the one place in this whole broken county where they could eat a plate of barbecue without the world trying to kill them. I'm calling because those people don't know what's standing next to them. And the police won't listen. And the boy who saw it, an 11-year-old kid who noticed what every adult in a 50-mile radius missed, deserves to know that somebody picked up the phone." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 5 seconds. Then the voice said, "Don't let them leave the lot. Any of them. I need 4 hours." The line went dead. Gideon set the phone down and stared at the wall. 4 hours. The event was scheduled to end at 5. Sunset was at 8:15. That left a window of 3 hours and 15 minutes between the last family leaving and whatever the Crimson Circuit had planned for the empty lot after dark. 3 hours and 15 minutes to keep 60 families safe without telling them they were in danger. To hold 3 trained operatives in place without alerting them they'd been made. To reactivate a network of contacts he had deliberately severed because the last time he'd used them, a man had vanished from the shoulder of Route 9 and never come home. He picked up the coffee mug, took a long, slow drink. The coffee was cold now, bitter and thick at the bottom where the grounds had settled. He carried the mug to the side door and stepped back into the afternoon light. Across the parking lot, Cal Turner looked up from the registration table. Their eyes met across 70 feet of gravel and chrome and barbecue smoke. The boy didn't wave, didn't nod. He just held the gaze with a steadiness that no 11-year-old should possess, and that Gideon recognized immediately because he had seen it before, in Darren's eyes, the night Darren had tried to tell him the truth, the night Gideon had told him to wait. Gideon lifted his coffee mug 1 inch, a gesture so small it was almost invisible, an acknowledgement, a promise. This time, nobody waits. But somewhere beyond the tree line, where the county road curved into shadow and the last cell tower signal dropped to nothing, a 4th vehicle sat parked on the shoulder with its engine running and its headlights off. Inside, a man studied a laptop screen showing a live feed from a camera so small it could have been mistaken for a button on a jacket currently being worn by the tallest stranger standing near the west exit of the Iron Covenant's parking lot. The man in the parked vehicle watched Gideon Cross step out of the clubhouse, watched him scan the crowd, watched him make eye contact with the boy at the registration table, and he smiled. Because the Crimson Circuit hadn't sent 3 men to the charity ride. They had sent 4, and the 4th one had been watching Gideon Cross for 6 months, long enough to know every exit, every brother, every pattern, every weakness, long enough to know about the boy. The 4th man's name didn't matter. He had used 11 of them in the last 6 years, printed on driver's licenses manufactured in a basement outside Reno that smelled like toner ink and burnt plastic. What mattered was the laptop balanced on his knees, the live feed showing the charity ride from a camera angle so precise it could read the text on Gideon Cross's coffee mug. What mattered was the file folder on the passenger seat. A physical folder, not digital, because digital left traces and the Crimson Circuit had learned that lesson the hard way 7 years ago when the ATF had cracked their communications like an egg on a skillet. The folder contained 6 photographs. Gideon Cross entering the clubhouse at 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 months ago. Gideon Cross fueling his Harley at the Sinclair station on Route 9, receipt timestamp visible. Gideon Cross standing in the parking lot of Cedar Bluff Elementary School at 3:15 p.m. on a Wednesday, watching a boy with dark hair and an oversized flannel walk toward a rusted Honda Civic. The fourth man closed the laptop. He didn't need the live feed anymore. The three men inside the event had done their job, not the job Gideon thought they were doing, which was reconnaissance for a weapons transfer, but the actual job, which was simpler and older and infinitely more dangerous. They were bait, and the fish had just swallowed the hook. Inside the clubhouse, Gideon stood behind the bar with Rooster, Dutch, Monk, and Bishop arranged in a loose half circle that would have looked casual to anyone passing by. The side door was propped open. Outside, the barbecue crowd was thinning as afternoon heat pushed families toward the shade. The steel guitar had been replaced by someone's Bluetooth speaker playing something with too much bass and not enough melody. Cal was still at the registration table. Raina was still beside him. "Harlan's coming," Rooster said. He tucked the burner phone into his cut and pulled out an unfiltered Camel. He didn't light it, just held it between his fingers like a talisman. Said 4 hours. Needs to make calls. Harlan. Bishop said the name like he was tasting something spoiled. He was 29, with the build of a man who had spent his early 20s carrying a 60-pound pack through mountain terrain, and his late 20s carrying the weight of everything he'd seen while doing it. His knuckles were scarred, his eyes were the color of creek water in December, cold and clear and constantly moving. The ghost, the guy nobody's seen in 2 years, that's who we're waiting on. That's who we're waiting on, Gideon confirmed. And in the meantime? In the meantime, nobody leaves this lot. Not them, not us. Bishop's jaw tightened. He looked at Gideon with an expression that was 1 degree short of challenge. There are kids out there, Gid, families. If these guys are circuit and they figure out they've been made, they won't figure it out. You don't know that. I know that because the only people in this building who know what Cal saw are standing in this room right now, and none of them are going to change the way they walk, the way they talk, or the way they breathe for the next 4 hours. Gideon's voice was level, not raised, not lowered, pitched exactly where it had been a minute ago, which was somehow more unsettling than if he had shouted. We keep the event running. We keep the families comfortable. We keep eyes on all 3 of them without making contact. When the families leave, we stay. When they make their move, we're already in position. And if they make their move before the families leave? Gideon looked at Bishop. The younger man held the gaze for 3 seconds before his eyes dropped to the bar top. Not because he was afraid, because he recognized the answer in Gideon's silence. An answer that said the question itself was the wrong one, that a man who had survived Fallujah and buried a brother and spent 7 years carrying a guilt so heavy it had reshaped his spine was not going to let a single child walk into a crossfire. And the fact that Bishop had asked meant he hadn't yet learned the thing that separated men who talked about protection from men who lived it. The difference was that the men who lived it never had to explain what they would do. They simply did it, and the explanation was whatever was left standing when the dust settled. Dutch, Gideon said. West exit, stay visible. If the tall one moves toward the gate, you move with him, not toward him, with him. Match his pace. Mirror his body language. Make him feel observed without feeling confronted. Dutch nodded. He was 46, lean as a fence rail, with a silver-streaked beard and hands that could rebuild a transmission in the dark. He didn't ask questions because he had learned 20 years ago that questions were what you asked when you didn't trust the man giving orders, and he trusted Gideon the way he trusted gravity, not because it was kind, but because it was consistent. Monk, east perimeter. The second one's been counting paces along the fence line. I want to know what he's measuring. Monk said nothing. He picked up his tool bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out the side door with the unhurried gait of a man heading to fix a broken hinge. He was 51, half Lakota, with a voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear it, which meant people were always leaning toward Monk, which meant Monk always controlled the distance. Bishop, the young man looked up. The truck. The third one hasn't moved from the tailgate. I need to know what's in the bed. Not by looking, by listening. You walk past on your way to the porta-johns. You drop something. You bend down to pick it up. You take 3 seconds to hear what's under that tonneau cover. Metal shifts different than plastic. Plastic shifts different than nothing. Bishop stared at him. You want me to walk past a potential weapons vehicle and drop my keys. I want you to walk past a parked truck and tie your boot. You're a veteran at a charity ride. You're not doing anything suspicious. You're doing what 1,000 guys in this lot have done today. Walking past a truck on the way to take a leak. Bishop pulled the unlit cigarette from his lips, looked at it, put it back. And Rooster. Gideon glanced at the older man. Rooster was leaning against the bar with his arms folded and his eyes half closed, which was the posture he adopted when he was listening with every cell in his body and didn't want anyone to know it. Rooster stays with me, Gideon said. We need to talk about something. The other 3 left. The side door swung shut behind Bishop, and the clubhouse settled into a silence that was thicker than the one before. The kind of silence that exists between 2 men who have known each other long enough to hear the conversations that haven't happened yet. Rooster lit the Camel. The match flared orange in the dim light. He shook it out and dropped it into an ashtray shaped like a Harley gas tank. Say it, he said. Gideon pulled out the wooden box, set it on the bar. The brass latch caught a sliver of light from the window. Darren's notes, Gideon said. The ones in the box, the map on the gas station receipt. What about them? I never gave them to the ATF. Rooster's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. The smoke curled upward in a thin line that broke apart against the ceiling fan. He didn't blink. He didn't set the cigarette down. He held it frozen in midair the way a man holds a grenade pin after he's already pulled it, aware that the next movement determines everything. You told me you turned those over, Rooster said. 7 years ago. You sat in this room at this bar, and you told me you gave Darren's notes to Agent Vasquez. You said the ATF had everything. You said they were using it to build the case. I lied. The word landed on the bar top like a dropped shell casing. Small. Heavy. Final. Rooster set the cigarette in the ashtray. He placed both hands flat on the bar, palms down, the way you steady yourself against a table when the room starts tilting. His breathing changed, deeper, slower, controlled, the breath pattern of a man who was actively choosing not to react the way his body wanted him to react. Why? Because Darren's notes didn't just map the circuit's routes. They mapped ours, our schedules, our storage, our contacts. Every run we'd done for 2 years, legal and otherwise. If I gave those notes to the ATF, they wouldn't have just taken down the circuit. They would have taken down us. Silence. The ceiling fan clicked on every third rotation, a broken bearing that Monk had promised to fix 6 times and never had. So you buried them, Rooster said. I buried them. And Darren, the night he disappeared, he called you. He told you what he'd found, and you told him to wait. Yes. Was it because you thought the ATF had it covered? Or was it because you were afraid of what his notes would do to us if they got out? Gideon didn't answer. The silence answered for him, not with words, but with weight. The accumulated gravity of 7 years of carrying a lie that had calcified into something so dense it had its own orbit, pulling everything around it into a shape that looked like leadership, but was actually guilt wearing a president's patch. Rooster pushed off the bar. He took 2 steps backward, not away from Gideon, away from the proximity, the intimacy. The 30-year friendship that had just cracked along a fault line neither of them had known was there. Darren trusted you, Rooster said. His voice was quiet now, not calm. Quiet in the way a highway is quiet at 3 a.m., empty and exposed and stretched out in both directions with nothing to stop whatever was coming. He brought you everything he had, every name, every route, every date, and you let him ride into the dark alone because you were protecting the club. I was protecting the club. You were protecting yourself. The words hit Gideon like a fist he didn't block because he knew he deserved it. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He stood behind the bar with his hands at his sides and absorbed the accusation the way a wall absorbs a bullet, silently, permanently, with a hole that would never close. Maybe, he said. Maybe I was. I don't know anymore. I've turned that night over so many times in my head that the edges are worn smooth, and I can't feel the difference between what I thought and what I wanted to believe. But I know this. If I'd given those notes to Vasquez, half the brothers in this club would have done time. You, Dutch, me, Darren himself. His notes were thorough, too thorough. He documented everything, including the things we did that weren't charity rides and community outreach. So you chose the club over Darren. I chose the club over the truth, and Darren paid for it. Rooster picked up his cigarette. It had burned down to the filter while sitting in the ashtray. He looked at it, dropped it, crushed it under his boot with more force than a dead cigarette required. Does anyone else know? No. Not Dutch, not Monk. No one. And you're telling me now because the circuit is back, because they're standing in our parking lot, because whatever happens tonight, those notes are the only advantage we have. Darren mapped their network from the inside, names of contacts, drop points, communication protocols. If the circuit is running the same playbook 7 years later, Darren's notes are the key to shutting them down. Gideon paused. But if I use them, this club comes apart. Everything we built, everything we survived, it all comes out. Rooster stared at him for a long time. The light through the window shifted as a cloud passed over the sun, and for a moment the clubhouse went dark enough that neither man could read the other's face clearly. When the light returned, Rooster's expression had changed. Not softened, hardened in a different direction, the way metal hardens when you quench it, becoming something that will either hold an edge or shatter with no middle ground. You should have told me, Rooster said, 7 years ago. You should have stood in this room and told me the truth and let us decide together what to do with Darren's notes. Instead, you carried it alone because that's what you do. That's what you've always done. You carry it alone and you call it leadership, and you don't notice the weight until somebody else breaks under it. I know. Darren broke under it. I know. Rooster pulled out another cigarette, lit it, inhaled, exhaled, watched the smoke disappear into the ceiling fan's rotation. Show me the notes. Gideon opened the wooden box. He lifted the photograph of Darren, that grin, that wave, that frozen moment of a man who still believed his brothers would listen, and set it face up on the bar. Beneath it, the folded paper. Beneath that, the gas station receipt with the hand-drawn map, the pencil lines faded but still legible, marking routes and drop points across a network that covered 6 states and used charity events as camouflage. Rooster unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across Darren's handwriting, small, precise, the penmanship of a man who had been trained to write field reports in conditions where legibility could mean the difference between a successful extraction and a body bag. Names, dates, license plates, GPS coordinates written in military notation, and at the bottom, circled 3 times in red ink, a single sentence that made Rooster's breath catch. He read it twice. Then he set the paper down and looked at Gideon with an expression that was no longer anger. It was something worse. It was understanding. He knew, Rooster whispered. Darren knew they'd come back. Last line of his notes, written the same night he called me. Rooster looked at the sentence again. 7 years old, written in red ink on a gas station receipt by a dead man who had seen the future with perfect clarity and been told to wait until morning. The words said, "They'll let you think it's over. They'll go quiet. They'll wait until you stop watching. And then they'll come back to the same place because the best hiding spot is the one everyone already searched." Outside, a Harley engine revved in the parking lot. A child laughed. The barbecue smoke shifted direction as the wind changed, carrying the smell of hickory and charcoal through the propped-open side door and into the clubhouse where 2 old men stood over a dead brother's final warning and felt the full weight of everything they had failed to do in time. "Rooster, don't. I need to know if you're still with me." The older man looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, but his jaw was set, and his hands were steady, and his voice when it came was the voice of a man who had decided something and would not be moved from it. "I'm not with you. Rooster said. "I'm with Darren. I'm standing where he stood, holding what he held, seeing what he saw, and I'm doing what you should have let him do 7 years ago." He folded the notes and put them in his cut, against his chest, over his heart, where the inner pocket sat. "I'm finishing his work." Gideon said nothing. There was nothing to say. The debt was real, the fracture was real, and the only way forward was through the next 4 hours with the brotherhood that had just discovered its foundation was built on a lie told by the man they trusted most. He walked to the side door and stepped outside. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer, the sky beginning its slow bruise toward evening. 3:45. The event was winding down. Families were packing up coolers and folding lawn chairs and herding children toward minivans. The parking lot was entering its transitional phase, still populated enough to feel safe, but emptying fast enough to feel the absence coming. Dutch was at the west exit. The tall stranger had moved to the center of the lot, standing between 2 rows of Harleys, studying something on his phone with the focused attention of a man receiving instructions. Monk was near the east fence, kneeling beside a post with a wrench in his hand, his eyes on the second stranger, who had completed his perimeter walk and was now standing completely still, a statue in work boots, watching the families leave with an expression that could have been patience or anticipation or hunger. Bishop came around the corner of the clubhouse. His walk was different, faster, tighter, the controlled urgency of a man who had found something and was trying not to show it. He reached Gideon at the side door and spoke without stopping. "Metal," Bishop said, "under the tonneau cover. I heard it shift when the wind rocked the truck. Not loose metal, stack. Secured but not bolted. Cases, maybe. Long cases." Gideon felt the air change. Not the temperature, not the wind. The air itself, the quality of it, the way it moved through his lungs, the way it tasted on the back of his tongue. It was the same air he had breathed in Fallujah the moment before contact, when the silence wasn't silence but a held breath, and the held breath wasn't calm, but the half-second pause between the trigger and the round leaving the chamber. "How many?" "I counted 3 shifts, 3 distinct sounds. Could be 4. Long cases. Stacked. In a truck with no plates, parked at a charity event that had been used 7 years ago as a staging ground for weapons transfers by an organization that was supposed to be dead." Gideon looked across the parking lot at Cal Turner. The boy was helping his mother break down the registration table, folding the tablecloth with the methodical precision of a kid who had learned to make himself useful because usefulness was the only currency that kept adults from overlooking him. His eyes were still scanning, still tracking, still processing the geometry of threat and movement that his 11-year-old brain had been mapping since the moment the black truck pulled through the gate. And then Cal looked up, not at Gideon, past him, over his shoulder, toward the tree line beyond the back fence of the parking lot, where the county road curved into shadow and the pines grew thick enough to hide anything that didn't want to be seen. Cal's face changed. It was subtle. A tightening around the eyes, a slight parting of the lips, the universal human expression of recognition, not of a face, but of a pattern, something he'd seen, something that didn't belong. Gideon turned. The tree line was dense and dark and still. Nothing moved, no vehicle visible, no figure. Just pines and shadow and the low murmur of wind through branches that hadn't lost their needles yet. But Cal was still staring, and Cal didn't stare at nothing. Gideon's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from a number with no caller ID. 6 words. "Fourth man, behind the tree line." The phone buzzed again. "He's been watching you for months." And then a third message, this one with a photograph attached. Gideon opened it. The image was grainy, shot from a distance, through a window. It showed the interior of a vehicle, a laptop screen displaying a live feed of the Iron Covenant's parking lot, and next to the laptop, on the passenger seat, a folder. Open. The photograph on top was visible despite the grain. It was a photograph of Cal Turner walking out of Cedar Bluff Elementary School. Gideon's hand closed around the phone so hard the case cracked along the left edge. His breathing didn't change. His posture didn't shift. His face remained exactly as it had been 3 seconds ago, stone and scar tissue, and the carefully maintained blankness of a man who had trained himself to process catastrophic information without visible reaction. But inside, behind the wall, beneath the scar tissue, something moved. Something old. Something that had been sleeping since Fallujah, since the night he held a dying man's hand in a burned-out building and promised he would never let another innocent person pay for his mistakes. The promise he had broken with Darren. The promise that was now attached to an 11-year-old boy with dark hair and duct-taped sneakers and eyes that saw everything the adults around him were too blind or too afraid to see. Gideon looked at Cal across the parking lot. The boy looked back. And in that exchange, 2 pairs of eyes meeting across 70 feet of gravel and chrome and the fading smoke of a charity barbecue that had become something none of them had planned for. A new contract was written. Not spoken, not signed. Written in the language that existed before language, the language of a man who had failed once and would not fail again, looking at a child who had been failed by every system designed to protect him and had learned to protect himself. Gideon put the phone in his pocket. He walked to the bar. He poured the cold coffee down the sink. He rinsed the mug. He set it upside down on the drain rack. Then he called Rooster, Dutch, Monk, and Bishop back inside. When the side door closed behind the last of them, Gideon said 5 words that changed everything. "They're not here for weapons." The room went silent. The clock ticked. The ceiling fan clicked. "They're here for the boy." The words hung in the air like smoke from a barrel that had just been fired. "They're here for the boy." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The ceiling fan clicked through its broken rotation, once, twice, 3 times, and in those 3 clicks, the geometry of everything the Iron Covenant had assumed about the last 4 hours collapsed inward like a building that had been burning from the inside while everyone admired the exterior. Bishop was the first to speak. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Gideon said. He pulled the phone from his pocket and set it on the bar, screen up, the photograph of Cal walking out of Cedar Bluff Elementary visible to everyone in the room. "They've been watching me for 6 months, watching the clubhouse, watching the event planning, watching who comes and goes. And they noticed the same thing we all noticed, but never said out loud. That kid sees things. He processes patterns faster than any surveillance equipment they could buy. He spotted their men inside of 20 minutes when trained federal agents missed the circuit for 7 years. Rooster leaned forward. The photograph glowed on the phone screen, the grain making Cal's face slightly blurred but unmistakably his. The dark hair, the oversized flannel, the backpack hanging off one shoulder. Rooster's hand trembled for half a second before he flattened it against the bar. "They want to recruit an 11-year-old, Rooster said. Not a question, a translation. "No," Gideon's voice dropped. "They want to remove a threat." Cal identified their men. He recognized the symbol. He told his mother. His mother told me. If the circuit is rebuilding, if they've spent 7 years going dark, restructuring, rerouting, the last thing they need is a kid with a photographic attention span walking around Cedar Bluff knowing what their patches look like and who's wearing them. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it. This wasn't tension. This wasn't suspense. This was the specific nauseating stillness that fills a room when men who have spent their lives preparing for violence realize that violence has been preparing for them, and it brought a target they cannot afford to lose. Dutch spoke from the corner near the side door, where he had been standing with his arms crossed and his back against the wall. His voice was thin and precise, stripped of everything except the mechanical function of language. "Where's the 4th man now?" "Tree line. Behind the back fence. County road shoulder. He has a live camera feed from inside the event. One of the 3 is wearing it. Button camera. Jacket mounted. He's been watching everything we do in real time." "Then he saw us gather," Dutch said. "He saw you call us inside. He knows we know. He knows I know something. He doesn't know what." "That's a thin line, Gid." "Thin lines are all we've got." Monk set his tool bag on the floor. He hadn't spoken since entering the clubhouse, and when he did, his voice carried the weight of a man who measured words the way a surgeon measured incisions. Precisely, minimally, with full awareness of what each cut would open. The boy's mother. What about her? Does she know? She knows about the patches. She knows about the hand signals. She doesn't know about the photograph. She doesn't know they've been watching Cal. She needs to know. If I tell her right now, she panics. If she panics, she grabs Cal and runs for the parking lot. If she runs for the parking lot, she's in the open on camera. And the fourth man has a direct line of sight from the tree line to every vehicle in this lot. Monk absorbed this. His face didn't change. Monk's face never changed. It existed in a state of permanent neutrality that could have been read as calm or emptiness, depending on how well you knew him. Those who knew him well understood that the neutrality was neither. It was containment. Monk felt everything. He simply refused to let it leak. Then we move her without telling her why, Monk said. How? I fix things. That's what people see me do. I walk to the registration table. I tell Raina the clubhouse bathroom is flooding, and I need her to come hold a flashlight while I check the shutoff valve. She comes inside. The boy comes with her because she won't leave him alone in the lot. Once they're inside, we lock the side door. Gideon stared at Monk for 3 seconds. Then he nodded once. Monk picked up his tool bag and walked out. The clubhouse fell quiet again. Through the propped open side door, the sounds of the event filtered in. Fewer now, thinner, the crowd dissolving as the afternoon bled toward evening. Car doors were closing. Engines were starting. The barbecue pit was down to embers, and the kettle corn stand had already been packed away. Bishop moved to the window. He pulled the curtain aside 1 inch and watched the parking lot through the gap. We're down to maybe 20 families. Give it 30 minutes, it'll be just us and them. And Cal, Rooster said. And Cal. Gideon turned to Rooster. The notes. Darren's notes. You said you were going to finish his work. Rooster reached into his cut and pulled out the folded paper. He spread it on the bar top, flattening the creases with his palm. The handwriting was small and dense, filling every available space on the page, including the margins, where Darren had added annotations in a different color ink. Green, as though he'd gone back and updated his own findings at a later date. Look at this, Rooster said. He pointed to a column of names near the bottom of the page. Darren listed the circuit's regional contacts, 14 names. The ATF raid 7 years ago took down 9 of them. These 5 were never identified, never arrested, never mentioned in any report. Gideon leaned in. The names were written in Darren's precise lettering, each one followed by a 2-letter state abbreviation and a phone number. 5 names. 5 ghosts who had walked through the ATF's net and disappeared into the world like water through sand. The 4th name on the list made Gideon's blood stop. He read it twice. He read it 3 times. He placed his finger on the page as though touching the ink would confirm or deny what his eyes were telling his brain. And his brain was rejecting because the alternative was a reality he was not prepared to inhabit. Gideon? Rooster's voice was careful now. He had seen the color leave Gideon's face. What is it? Gideon straightened up. His hands found the edge of the bar and gripped it. The wood creaked under the pressure. His knuckles went white, then red, then white again as the blood alternated between flowing and stopping in his fingers. The 4th name, he said. Rooster looked at the list. Read the name. Read the state abbreviation. Read the phone number. Then Rooster's cigarette fell from his fingers and hit the floor, still lit, trailing a thin ribbon of smoke that nobody moved to extinguish. That's not possible, Rooster whispered. That's Darren's handwriting. I know it's his handwriting. I'm telling you, it's not possible. Darren was thorough. You said it yourself. He documented everything. Gideon, that name, that phone number, I know who it is. The name on the list was Frank Harlan, the man Gideon had called 2 hours ago, the ghost who had been off the grid for 2 years, the man who was supposedly raising goats in Montana, the man who had said he needed 4 hours and asked Gideon not to let anyone leave the lot. Darren Voss's brother-in-law. Darren Voss's Crimson Circuit contact. The room rearranged itself. Not physically. The walls didn't move, the bar didn't shift, the ceiling fan kept clicking on its broken rotation. But the room rearranged itself in every other way that mattered, because the man Gideon had called for help was listed in a dead man's notes as a member of the organization they were trying to stop, and the 4 hours he had requested suddenly looked less like preparation time and more like a countdown. "He told me not to let them leave," Gideon said. His voice was flat, mechanical. The voice of a man running calculations in real time while his emotions hammered against the inside of his skull, demanding to be let in. "He said he needed 4 hours. He said don't let anyone leave the lot." "He was pinning us," Rooster said. "He was pinning us. 4 hours. That puts us at, what, 7:30? 7:45? Sunset is 8:15. So he arrives after dark, with whatever he's bringing. And we're all still here, sitting in this clubhouse with an 11-year-old boy and his mother, waiting for the man we called for help, who turns out to be the man Darren was trying to warn us about 7 years ago." Bishop turned from the window. His face had gone through several stages in the last 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, rage, and finally a cold clarity that settled over his features like frost on a windshield. "You called one of them. You actually called one of them and told him where we are and what we know and that we have the kid." "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you buried Darren's notes for 7 years instead of reading them." The accusation hit the same wall that Rooster's had hit earlier, the wall Gideon had built between himself and the consequences of his decisions. A wall that had been weakening all afternoon and was now developing cracks large enough to see through. "That's fair," Gideon said. "Fair." Bishop's laugh was short and sharp, a sound that had no humor in it. "Fair is not the word I'd use for a situation where our president invited the enemy into our house because he spent 7 years sitting on evidence that would have told him exactly who not to call." "Bishop," Rooster's voice. A warning. No, Rooster. You got your turn. You said your piece. Now I'm saying mine." Bishop stepped away from the window and faced Gideon across the bar. The space between them was 10 feet, but it felt like a canyon. 2 men on opposite edges of a trust that had just been hollowed out from below. "I followed you. I took the patch. I gave you my word and my time and my back because you told me this club was different. You told me we were protectors, guardians. You told me the brotherhood meant something." "It does mean something." "Then why is there a dead man's warning in your pocket that you hid for 7 years? Why is there a photograph of a child on your phone taken by people you led straight to us? Why are we standing in this clubhouse planning a defense against a man you personally invited?" Gideon didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He didn't rationalize. He stood behind the bar with both hands on the wood and let Bishop's words land because they deserved to land, because they were accurate. Because the truth doesn't become less true when it's shouted by an angry man with scars on his knuckles and betrayal in his eyes. The side door opened. Monk stepped through, followed by Raina, followed by Cal. Raina looked confused. She was holding a flashlight she didn't need, looking around the clubhouse for the flooding bathroom that didn't exist. Cal was behind her, backpack over one shoulder, clipboard still in his hand. His eyes swept the room, the men, the tension, the photograph on the phone screen, the papers spread across the bar. And in the space of 2 seconds, his 11-year-old brain assembled a picture that most adults would have needed an hour to construct. "Something happened," Cal said. Not a question, a diagnosis. Raina turned to Gideon. "Monk said there was a plumbing issue." "There's no plumbing issue," Gideon said. "Sit down, Raina, both of you." The tone in his voice erased every question Raina had been forming. She guided Cal to one of the bar stools and sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her body angled slightly in front of his, the automatic positioning of a mother whose instincts had activated even before her mind caught up. Gideon told her. Not everything, not the Crimson Circuit, not Darren's notes, not the 7-year lie. He told her the minimum necessary truth, which was still enough to drain the color from her face and send her hand from Cal's shoulder to his arm, gripping it hard enough that the boy winced. "Someone has been watching Cal," Gideon said. "We don't think the men at the event are here for a weapons transfer. We think they're here because Cal identified them, and they consider that a problem. Raina's breathing accelerated. Shallow, rapid, the breathing pattern of an animal that has been cornered and is calculating the distance to every exit in the room. We need to leave, she said. You can't leave. Don't tell me what I can't do with my own child. Raina, there's a man in the tree line behind the parking lot with a direct line of sight to every car in this lot. If you walk out that door and get in your Honda and drive toward the gate, you will be visible for approximately 40 seconds between this building and your vehicle. That's 40 seconds in the open with your son. Raina's grip on Cal's arm tightened. The boy didn't pull away. He looked at Gideon with steady eyes and said, "The fourth one." Everyone in the room turned to look at him. "I saw something in the trees," Cal said. "When I was breaking down the registration table, a reflection, glass, like a lens or a screen. I thought it was a hunter's scope. But it wasn't, was it?" "No," Gideon said. "It wasn't." Cal absorbed this. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He processed the information the way he processed everything, systematically, layer by layer, integrating it into the pattern he'd been building since the black truck pulled through the gate. His face was pale, and his hands were slightly shaky on the clipboard, but his voice was steady when he spoke again. "The tall one, near the west exit. He changed position 11 minutes ago. He moved to the center of the lot between the 2 rows of bikes closest to the main gate. If someone was trying to leave in a car, he'd see them before the person in the trees." "Cal," Raina whispered, "stop." The second one finished his perimeter walk, and he's standing near the east fence. He measured the distance between the fence and the back of the clubhouse. I counted his paces. 63. That's about 180 feet. If someone needed to cover that distance quickly... "Cal, stop." The boy stopped. Not because his mother told him to, but because he saw her face. And on her face, he saw something that shut down every analytical process in his brain and replaced it with the one thing he couldn't process: the fear of the person he loved most in the world, directed not at the strangers in the parking lot, but at the realization that her 11-year-old son was thinking like a tactical analyst because the world had forced him to become one. Raina pulled him close. She wrapped both arms around him and held him against her chest, and for a moment he was just a boy, small and scared and leaning into his mother's body the way small, scared children have leaned into their mothers since the beginning of everything. His clipboard clattered to the floor. His backpack slid off his shoulder, and in the dim light of the clubhouse, surrounded by scarred men who carried weapons and secrets and the accumulated damage of wars both foreign and domestic, an 11-year-old boy closed his eyes and breathed and let himself be held. Gideon watched them. Something moved behind his eyes. Not tears, because Gideon Cross hadn't cried in 23 years, but something adjacent to tears. Something that existed in the same neighborhood and spoke the same language, but expressed itself as a tightening of the jaw and a single, barely perceptible swallow. He turned to his brothers. New plan. Bishop still angry, still burning. The old plan was call Harlan. The old plan was wait 4 hours. What's the new plan, Gid? Call another circuit member and ask them for help? Gideon absorbed the hit. The new plan is we stop waiting. For what? For anyone. For Harlan. For the ATF. For the system. For somebody else to fix this. He looked at each of them in turn. Rooster, Dutch, Monk, Bishop. 4 men who had followed him into rooms darker than this one and walked out on the other side because they trusted the man giving orders. 4 men who had just learned that the man giving orders had built a lie into the foundation of their brotherhood and let a brother disappear because the truth was too expensive. I buried Darren's notes because they would have destroyed this club. I told Harlan where we are because I thought he was one of us. I was wrong about the notes. I was wrong about Harlan. And Darren paid for it 7 years ago. That boy is not going to pay for it tonight. The ceiling fan clicked. The wind shifted outside, carrying the scent of pine and exhaust and the first cold edge of evening air that meant the sun was close to touching the tree line. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dutch asked. His voice carried no judgment. Dutch didn't deal in judgment. He dealt in logistics. "We have Darren's notes. All of them. Names, routes, contacts, GPS coordinates. Everything the ATF never got because I kept it in a box under this bar for 7 years. We give it to someone who can use it. Not Harlan. Not anyone Darren listed as circuit. Someone clean. Who? Gideon reached into his back pocket and pulled out a business card. It was creased and soft at the edges, the kind of card that had been carried for a long time without being used. He set it on the bar next to Darren's notes. Agent Rosa Delgado, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. A phone number, a federal seal. Vasquez retired 3 years ago, Gideon said. Delgado took his caseload. She's been trying to get a meeting with me for 18 months. I've been dodging her calls because I knew if she ever sat down with me and started asking about Darren, I'd have to either lie to a federal agent or tell the truth. Neither option ended well for this club. And now? Rooster asked. Now I call her. I give her everything. Darren's notes, the names, the routes. Harlan, the men in the lot, the fourth man in the trees, all of it. The implication settled over the room like a cold fog. All of it, including the parts of Darren's notes that documented the Iron Covenant's own activities. The legal and the otherwise. The runs that hadn't been charity rides. The storage that hadn't been motorcycle parts. The contacts who hadn't been community volunteers. You're handing her the club, Bishop said. I'm handing her the truth. The truth puts us in cells. The truth keeps that boy alive. Silence, long, airless. The kind of silence that exists inside the chamber of a revolver between the click and the bang. A silence that is not empty but loaded, containing every possible outcome simultaneously, waiting for the hammer to fall. Rooster spoke first. His voice was rough, scraped raw by cigarettes and emotion and the accumulated erosion of a friendship that had just been tested past its tolerance and somehow held. Make the call. Dutch. Make the call. Monk didn't speak. He nodded once. It was enough. Bishop stared at Gideon for a long time. His jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. The anger was still there, visible, kinetic, a living thing coiled in his chest. But beneath the anger, beneath the betrayal and the broken trust and the realization that the club he had pledged himself to was more complicated and more compromised than he had been told, there was something else. Something that looked in the dim light of the clubhouse very much like the reason he had taken the patch in the first place. Make the call, Bishop said. But when this is done, when that boy is safe and the circuit is finished and whatever happens to us happens, you and I are going to have a conversation. A real one. Not president to patch holder, man to man. And you're going to tell me everything, every lie, every buried note, every night you chose the club over the truth. And I'm going to decide whether I still wear this cut. Fair, Gideon said. Stop saying fair. Gideon picked up the business card. He looked at it the way a man looks at a detonator, knowing that once pressed, the explosion cannot be contained, cannot be directed, cannot be undone. Everything the Iron Covenant had been for 30 years would be dismantled by a single phone call to a federal agent who had been waiting 18 months for exactly this moment. He dialed. 3 rings. A woman's voice. Professional. Guarded. Agent Delgado. This is Gideon Cross, Iron Covenant MC Cedar Bluff. A pause. He could hear her recalibrating, rearranging her afternoon, picking up a pen. Mr. Cross, I've been trying to reach you. I know. I'm reaching back, and I need you to listen carefully because what I'm about to tell you has a time limit and a child's life attached to it. He told her everything. The circuit, the patches, the hand signals. Cal, the 3 men, the 4th man. Harlan, Darren's notes, the 7-year lie, the weapons cases under the tonneau cover. The photograph of an 11-year-old boy walking out of an elementary school, taken by men who considered his ability to see what others missed a threat worth eliminating. He told her about the Iron Covenant's own history, the parts that would put him and his brothers in a courtroom. He told her without hedging, without minimizing, without the careful editorial instinct that had kept him alive in a world where truth was a luxury and self-preservation was a reflex. When he finished, the line was quiet for 4 seconds. "I can have a team at your location in 90 minutes, Delgado said. "I don't have 90 minutes. Harlan will be here in less than 2 hours. The 3 men in the lot are going to figure out the families are gone and the lot is empty. And the 4th man has a camera on us right now. Then hold your position. Keep the boy inside. Keep your people visible. Do not engage the subjects. Do not approach the vehicle. And if they come to us?" "If they come to you, Mr. Cross, you do what you've always done. You protect the people behind you. And when my team arrives, you step aside and let the law finish what your brother started 7 years ago." The line clicked. Gideon set the phone on the bar. He looked at the wooden box, at Darren's photograph, at the grin and the wave and the frozen moment of a man who had been right about everything and had died for it. 90 minutes, he said. Outside, the sun touched the tree line. The first shadow of evening stretched across the parking lot, and the last family drove out through the front gate, taillights disappearing around the bend on Route 9, leaving behind an empty lot full of chrome and leather and the suffocating silence of a space that was about to become something no one had planned for. The tall stranger stepped out from between the rows of motorcycles. He looked at the clubhouse. Then he looked at the tree line. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 6 seconds. When he hung up, he walked toward the clubhouse door. Not the side door. The front door. The one that had been locked since the event started. The one with the Iron Covenant's emblem burned into the wood. A shield with a clenched fist. No words, no motto, just the image of a hand that had closed around something it would never release. He knocked. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. The sound of knuckles on oak reverberating through the empty clubhouse like a heartbeat counting down to 0. And inside, with a mother holding her son and 4 bikers standing between them and whatever came next, Gideon Cross realized that the 90 minutes Agent Delgado had promised might as well have been 90 years because the men outside were done waiting. The man in the trees was done watching. And the only thing standing between an 11-year-old boy and the organization that wanted him silenced was a room full of scarred veterans who had just given away every secret they had to a federal agent who was still 70 miles away. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. The sound moved through the clubhouse like a pulse, heavy, deliberate, timed to the rhythm of a man who was not asking for entry but announcing arrival. The oak door absorbed each impact and sent it vibrating through the floorboards, through the bar stools, through the soles of Gideon's boots, up through his legs, and into the base of his spine, where it met the accumulated tension of 6 hours and 43 minutes of holding everything together with nothing but willpower and scar tissue. Raina pulled Cal closer. The boy's face was pressed against her collarbone, his eyes open, staring sideways at the door. His breathing was controlled, too controlled for an 11-year-old. The measured inhale-exhale pattern of a child who had taught himself not to make noise during his parents' arguments and had never unlearned the skill. Gideon held up one hand. 5 fingers spread. Hold. He looked at his brothers. Rooster was behind the bar, positioned near the back wall where the shadows were deepest, and his silhouette would be invisible to anyone entering through the front. Dutch stood near the side door, their exit, their fallback, their last option if everything inside went wrong. Monk was beside Raina and Cal, close enough to touch them, far enough to move. Bishop was 3 feet to Gideon's left, slightly forward, his body angled toward the front door with the unconscious lean of a man whose combat training had overridden his conscious mind and put him in a position his muscles remembered even if his brain had moved on. The knocking stopped. A voice came through the door, deep, unhurried. The voice of a man standing on a porch he considered his own. "Gideon, open the door. We both know standing on opposite sides of wood doesn't change anything." Gideon didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't the tall stranger. He'd heard that man speak at the barbecue pit, and the register was different. This voice was older, smoother, worn at the edges like a river stone that had been tumbling through current for decades. "Who are you?" Gideon called. "Open the door and find out. Or don't, and find out anyway. Either way, the next 60 seconds end the same." Bishop's hand moved toward his waistband. Gideon caught the motion without looking, peripheral awareness honed by years of reading rooms where a wrong glance could start a war, and shook his head once. No. He walked to the front door. His boots on the hardwood made the sound that the clubhouse knew best, the slow, heavy, measured stride of a man who carried weight in his bones and had stopped trying to walk lightly 20 years ago. He reached the door. He did not put his hand on the handle. He stood 6 inches from the oak and spoke through it. You're standing at the front door of a closed clubhouse after an event that ended 40 minutes ago. You weren't invited. You're not welcome. And the 3 men you brought with you have been watched since they drove through our gate in a truck with no plates carrying long cases under a tonneau cover. So I'll ask again. Who are you? Silence on the other side. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of recalculation. The man behind the door was adjusting, not his plan, but his approach. Gideon could hear it the way a veteran hears a weapon being repositioned in the dark, not through sound, but through the quality of the quiet. My name is Harlan. Gideon's hand stopped in midair, 2 inches from the door handle. Behind him, Rooster straightened. The cigarette in his mouth, unlit, held like a reflex, dropped to the floor. Harlan is supposed to be in Montana, Gideon said. Harlan was supposed to arrive in 90 minutes. Harlan is supposed to be on our side. I was never in Montana. I've been in Cedar Bluff for 3 weeks. I've been watching this clubhouse from a rental on Miller Road, 4 blocks east. And as for whose side I'm on, that depends on what you do in the next 30 seconds. Gideon turned and looked at Rooster. The older man's face was ash gray, his hands flat on the bar top, his body rigid. He mouthed one word. Darren. Gideon turned back to the door. You were on Darren's list. I know I was on Darren's list. Darren was thorough. Darren was brilliant. Darren was also my wife's brother, and he didn't understand the difference between being inside something and being part of it. Explain that. Open the door. Explain it through the door. Another pause. Then the man who called himself Harlan did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not a mocking laugh. A tired laugh. The kind that escapes from a man who has been carrying a performance for so long that the absurdity of maintaining it in this particular moment, at this particular door, strikes him as genuinely, painfully funny. Gideon, I was ATF. Deep cover. 18 months inside the Crimson Circuit. Darren found me because Darren found everything. He didn't know I was federal. He thought I was one of them. He put my name on his list because from where he was standing, I looked exactly like what I was pretending to be. And when I tried to tell him, when I tried to pull him out before the raid, he was already gone. Route 9, his bike on the shoulder, his helmet on the handlebars. The clubhouse was absolutely silent. Even the ceiling fan seemed to have stopped, though it hadn't. It was still clicking, still rotating, still pushing air through a room that had suddenly run out of breathable atmosphere. If you were ATF, Gideon said slowly, then you knew about the raid. You knew Darren was in danger, and you let him right into it alone. I didn't let him do anything. I was extracted 48 hours before the raid. My handler pulled me out because my cover was compromised. I spent the next 6 months in a debrief facility in Virginia with no phone, no contact, no way to reach anyone. By the time I got out, Darren was gone. The circuit was supposedly dismantled. And you had buried his notes in a box under your bar and told everyone you'd turned them over. The accusation came through the door like a blade through paper. Clean, precise, and impossible to deflect. How do you know about the box? Gideon asked. Because I've been watching you for 6 months, Gideon. Not from the tree line, not through a camera. I've been watching you the way you watch someone you're trying to decide whether to trust. And 2 weeks ago, I watched you take that box out from under the bar at 3 a.m, open it, stare at Darren's photograph for 11 minutes, and put it back. You do that every month, the 14th, the anniversary of the night he disappeared. Gideon's throat closed, not from emotion, from the physical sensation of being seen in a moment he had believed was invisible. The 14th, 3 a.m. the box, the photograph, 11 minutes, every month for 7 years, performed in what he thought was absolute solitude, witnessed by a man he had never known was there. Open the door, Gideon. Not because I'm asking, because the 3 men in your parking lot are not mine. The 4th man in the tree line is not mine. They are circuit, they are real, and they are here for the boy. And I have been trying to stop them for 2 years, and I'm running out of time, and I cannot do it from this side of your door. Gideon looked at Rooster. Rooster looked at the notes on the bar, Darren's notes, the list of names, the 4th entry, Frank Harlan. He looked at the state abbreviation, VA, Virginia, consistent with a federal debrief facility. Rooster closed his eyes, opened them, nodded once. Gideon opened the door. The man on the other side was not what he expected. Harlan was 50, maybe 55, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, a crooked nose broken at least twice, thin lips, deep-set eyes the color of wet concrete. He was not large, not physically imposing. He was the kind of man you could stand next to in a grocery store and forget before you reached the checkout, which, Gideon realized, was exactly the point. 18 months deep cover inside a weapons network required a face that nobody remembered. Harlan stepped inside. He didn't look around. He didn't scan the room. He walked directly to the bar, pulled out a stool, and sat down as though he'd been here before. And perhaps he had. In the 3 weeks he'd been watching from Miller Road, mapping the interior through windows, memorizing the layout the way only a man trained in tactical entry would bother to do. He looked at Cal. The boy looked back from his mother's arms. 2 pairs of eyes meeting. One belonging to a man who had lost his brother-in-law to the same danger that now circled this child, the other belonging to a child who had the same gift that had gotten Darren Voss killed. "You're the one who saw the patches," Harlan said. Cal nodded. "You're good at that, seeing things." "I just watch," Cal said. "That's all." "That's not all. That's everything. That's what makes you dangerous to them and valuable to everyone else." Harlan turned to Gideon. "The 3 men in your lot are advance team. The man in the tree line is command. His name, his real name, is Elias Croft. He rebuilt the circuit from the ground up after the ATF raid. Took him 7 years. New routes, new contacts, new protocol, same staging grounds. Darren predicted it. Last line of his notes. "We read it," Rooster said from behind the bar. "Then you know. Croft uses the same locations because they've already been cleared by law enforcement. Nobody searches a place that's already been searched. He's been running test operations through Cedar Bluff for 8 months. Small shipments, single vehicles, building confidence. Tonight was supposed to be the first full-scale transfer. 12 cases of military-grade hardware moving through this parking lot between 9 p.m. and midnight. But then your boy here noticed his men, and Croft had to pivot." "Pivot to what?" Gideon asked. "Pivot to elimination. Croft doesn't take risks with witnesses, especially witnesses who can identify his operatives on site. He's already called in additional personnel. There are 2 more vehicles on Route 9 right now, parked at the rest stop 6 miles west. They'll be here within 20 minutes of his signal." "What signal?" "When the last light goes off in this clubhouse. When he thinks you've settled in for the night and your guard is down. That's when they move." Gideon looked at the windows. The neon signs behind the bar cast a red and blue glow across the room. The overhead fluorescents were off. The only other light came from the single bulb above the side door and the fading gray of twilight pressing through the curtains. "So we keep the lights on," Bishop said. "You keep the lights on, you buy time. You don't buy safety. Croft has waited 7 years. He'll wait 7 more hours if he has to. The question isn't whether he moves. The question is whether your federal agent gets here before he does." Delgado said 90 minutes. "From when?" Gideon checked his phone. The call to Delgado had been 37 minutes ago. 53 minutes? 53 minutes is a long time when you're sitting in a building with 1 front door, 1 side door, and windows that don't lock properly on the east wall. Monk spoke. Everyone turned because Monk speaking was an event. The garage bay, service tunnel underneath, runs from the hydraulic pit to the drainage outlet behind the east fence, 18 inches wide. Tight, but passable. "For a child," Harlan said. for a child and a small adult. Every eye in the room moved to Raina. She was thin, exhausted thin, the kind of thin that comes from years of skipping meals so your kid can eat. She looked at the men looking at her and understood immediately what they were calculating. "No," she said. "Raina, no. I am not crawling through a tunnel and leaving these men to—" "You're not leaving us," Gideon said. "You're taking Cal out. That's the mission. That's the only mission. Everything else, Darren, the circuit, Harlan, the ATF, this club, none of it matters if that boy isn't safe. You get him through the tunnel. You get him past the east fence. You get him to the Sinclair station on Route 9. Delgado's team will be coming from the south. You flag them down. You tell them where we are, and you do not come back." Raina's eyes filled, not with fear, with rage. The specific incandescent rage of a mother who has been told by the world her entire life that she is not enough to keep her marriage, not enough to keep her job, not enough to keep her dignity, and is now being told by the only people who ever gave her a chance that the best thing she can do is run. "I won't leave you here. You will, because your son needs you alive more than he needs heroes." The word landed. Heroes. Gideon had never used it before, had never applied it to himself or his brothers, had specifically avoided it because he knew what heroes looked like in real life. Not cape and costume, but blood and bone and the quiet horror of men who did what had to be done and spent the rest of their lives trying to sleep through the memory of doing it. Cal pulled away from his mother. He stood up from the bar stool. He was shaking, visible tremors in his hands, his shoulders, his jaw, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady. "I'll go," he said, "but I need to tell you something first." Gideon crouched, not to patronize, to meet the boy's eyes at his level. "Tell me." The second man, the one who walked the perimeter, he wasn't just counting paces. He was checking the fence posts, every third one. He was looking for something already installed. I saw him find it near the northeast corner. He reached down and adjusted something at the base of the post. It was small, dark. Could have been a sensor or a transmitter. The room went cold. Harlan stood from his stool. Motion sensors. Croft's team pre-staged the perimeter. They know about the drainage tunnel. They've known about it since they started scouting this property 8 months ago. "Then the tunnel's compromised," Dutch said. "The tunnel's monitored. There's a difference. Monitored means they'll know someone is moving through it. Compromised means they've blocked it. If the sensors are detection only, someone can still get through. They'll just trip the alarm when they do. And then Croft knows we're running the boy out the east side, and he repositions to intercept." The room collapsed into calculations. 4 men plus Harlan plus a mother and child. 1 compromised exit, 1 front door with a circuit operative about to knock again, 1 side door leading to an open parking lot under camera surveillance, motion sensors on the east perimeter, 2 additional vehicles 20 minutes away from arriving at Croft's signal. Gideon stood up. He looked at Harlan. "You said you've been trying to stop Croft for 2 years. What have you got?" "What do you mean, what have I got?" "Resources, contacts, equipment. Anything that isn't 5 middle-aged bikers with bad knees and a lot of emotional baggage." Harlan reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, aware that 5 pairs of hands in the room had tightened at the motion, and pulled out a phone. Not the burner Gideon had called earlier. A different phone, encrypted, government issue. "I have a direct line to a tactical team that was supposed to be staged at the county courthouse before I realized Croft had moved his timeline up. They're 40 minutes out. Delgado's team is 53 minutes out. Different team, different agency. My people aren't ATF. They're something else. Something else that doesn't have a name. Something else that has 17 names depending on which building you're standing in." Gideon filed that away. It didn't matter what Harlan's agency was called. What mattered was 40 minutes versus the 20 minutes before Croft's reinforcements arrived from the rest stop on Route 9. A 20-minute gap. 20 minutes when 6 people, 7, counting a child, would be alone in a building surrounded by men who had spent 7 years rebuilding a weapons empire and would not allow an 11-year-old boy to dismantle it by being alive. Then we hold, Gideon said. 20 minutes. That's all we need. We keep the lights on. We keep the doors closed. We keep the boy inside. And when Croft's reinforcements arrive, we hold them at the perimeter until your team gets here. Hold them how? Bishop asked. With what? With the only thing we've ever had, ourselves. Bishop stared at him. The anger was still there. It would be there for a long time, possibly forever, the way a scar is there forever, even after the wound has closed. But beneath it, something else was surfacing. Something that looked like the reason Bishop had walked into this clubhouse 2 years ago with nothing but a DD-214 and a need to belong to something that didn't require him to kill people he'd never met. 20 minutes, Bishop said. 20 minutes. Bishop cracked his knuckles. It was not a theatrical gesture. It was the sound of a man's body preparing itself for something his mind had already accepted. Okay. 20 minutes. What do you need me to do? East fence. Monk found 3 sensors during the event. He didn't know what they were then, but he marked the posts. I need you to find those sensors and disable them. Not remove them. Disable. If Croft's monitoring equipment shows the sensors going offline one by one, he'll think it's a malfunction. If the sensors disappear, he'll know it's us. I can do that. Dutch, front gate. Close it. Chain it. Use whatever's in the garage bay. If vehicles are coming from Route 9, they're coming through that gate. I want it shut. Dutch was already moving. Monk, take Raina and Cal to the garage bay. Show them the tunnel entrance. Don't send them through yet. Wait for my signal. When Bishop disables the sensors, you send them, not before. Monk placed his hand on Raina's shoulder. She flinched, then didn't. She took Cal's hand. The boy picked up his clipboard from the floor. An absurd gesture, a child's instinct to hold on to the familiar when everything familiar is being dismantled around him, and followed Monk toward the back hallway that led to the garage. At the doorway, Cal stopped. He turned back. He looked at Gideon. Mr. Cross. Yeah. The 4th man, Croft. The one in the trees. He's not just watching the parking lot. He's watching you. I know. No. I mean, he's watching you specifically. The camera in the tall man's jacket. Every time I saw the tall man move, he moved to keep you in frame. Not the crowd. Not the exits. You. He's been studying you, the way you walk, the way you stand, the way you react. Gideon absorbed this. An enemy who had spent 6 months learning his patterns, learning his responses, anticipating his decisions before he made them. Why are you telling me this? Cal held the clipboard against his chest. His eyes were enormous in the dim light, dark and bright, and filled with the terrible clarity of a child who understands too much. Because if he knows what you're going to do, then you have to do something you wouldn't do, something he hasn't seen, something that isn't in your pattern. Then Cal turned and followed Monk into the darkness of the back hallway, and the last thing Gideon saw before the boy disappeared was the duct tape on his left sneaker, peeling at the edge, holding together a shoe that should have been replaced months ago, worn by a kid who never complained because he'd learned that complaining was a luxury reserved for people whose problems could be fixed by adults who were paying attention. Gideon stood in the empty clubhouse. Rooster was behind the bar. Harlan was on his encrypted phone, speaking in a voice too low to hear, relaying coordinates and timelines to a team that existed in the space between agencies. The neon signs hummed. The ceiling fan clicked. Something he wouldn't do. Something outside his pattern. Gideon Cross had spent 30 years building a pattern. Control, containment, strategic patience. And never move first, never raise your voice, never let them see what you're carrying. It had kept him alive through Fallujah, through the founding of the club, through Darren's disappearance, through 7 years of lying to the men who trusted him most. His pattern was a fortress. It was also, he now realized, a cage, because a man who never deviates is a man who can be predicted, and a man who can be predicted is a man who can be defeated before the fight begins. He walked behind the bar. He reached underneath, not for the wooden box this time, but for something deeper, something pushed against the back wall behind a case of motor oil and a stack of shop rags. His hand closed around cold metal. He pulled it out and set it on the bar. A set of keys. Not motorcycle keys, not truck keys. The keys to the Iron Covenant's equipment trailer, a 30-foot enclosed rig parked behind the garage bay, used for hauling bikes to charity events and rallies. It hadn't been moved in 4 months. The tires were low. The battery was probably dead. But the trailer had something no other vehicle on the property had. A public address system, industrial grade, mounted on the roof. Originally installed for a veterans parade 3 years ago and never removed. Loud enough to be heard for a quarter mile in every direction. Something Croft hadn't seen, something outside the pattern. "Rooster," Gideon said. The older man looked up. "How fast can you jump-start the trailer?" Rooster's eyes narrowed, then widened. Then something happened to his face that hadn't happened all day. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not a smile. Not yet. But the ghost of one. The memory of what it felt like to follow Gideon Cross into something insane and come out the other side. 3 minutes, Rooster said, if the cables aren't corroded. Get it running. Get the PA online. And when I give you the signal, you light up every speaker on that rig and you broadcast everything. Darren's notes, the circuit's names, the routes, the drop points, every piece of evidence we just gave Delgado. You put it on the air where Croft can hear it, where his men can hear it, where every phone within a quarter mile can record it. Harlan looked up from his encrypted call, his wet concrete eyes locked onto Gideon with an expression that was equal parts alarm and admiration. "You're going to broadcast classified intelligence over a PA system. I'm going to make sure that even if Croft gets to us before your team arrives, the information is already out, already recorded, already in the air where he can't take it back. His entire network, every name, every route, shouted into the night where anyone with a phone can capture it. That's insane. That's something he hasn't seen me do." Harlan stared at him for 3 seconds. Then he turned back to his phone and said, "Accelerate the timeline. We have 15 minutes, not 40. Rooster grabbed the keys from the bar and moved toward the back hallway. Gideon followed him to the door, then stopped. Outside, the parking lot was empty. The chrome of abandoned motorcycles caught the last red light of a sun that had sunk below the tree line. The sky was the color of a wound, dark purple bleeding into black at the edges, one thin streak of orange on the horizon like a knife slash across fabric. The first stars were appearing. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the last hour, and the air tasted like pine resin and exhaust and the metallic edge of approaching weather. The tall stranger was no longer at the front door. He had moved. Gideon scanned the lot and found him, standing beside the black Dodge Ram, the tailgate down now, the tonneau cover pulled back. The long cases were visible. 4 of them. Black. The kind of cases that didn't hold fishing rods. The second stranger was at the east fence, standing, watching, hands at his sides. The third was somewhere Gideon couldn't see, which was worse than knowing exactly where he was. And beyond the tree line, invisible in the darkness, Elias Croft sat in his vehicle with a laptop and a camera feed and a phone that connected him to 2 additional vehicles 6 miles away, waiting for the signal that would bring them roaring down Route 9 toward a parking lot where an 11-year-old boy was crawling through an 18-inch drainage tunnel beneath a garage floor while his mother held his hand and 4 scarred bikers stood between him and the kind of men who made people disappear from the shoulders of country roads. Gideon looked at the sky, at the first stars, at the orange slash of dying light. 14 minutes. He walked back inside, closed the side door, and for the first time in 30 years, locked it from the inside. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Bishop. 2 words. Sensors down. And from the back of the clubhouse, through the hallway, past the garage bay, beneath the concrete floor, in the narrow drainage tunnel that smelled like rust and standing water and decades of neglected maintenance, Cal Turner began to crawl toward the east fence with his mother's hand gripping his ankle and his clipboard pressed against his chest, moving through 18 inches of darkness toward a world that had never once made room for him, but that 5 broken men were now rearranging with their bare hands to keep him alive. Cal's elbows scraped against concrete that hadn't been touched in years. The drainage tunnel was 18 inches of darkness, cold, wet, smelling of rust and stagnant water and the mineral tang of earth pressing down from every direction. His clipboard was wedged against his chest, the metal clip digging into his sternum with every forward pull, and his mother's hand gripped his left ankle with a pressure that would leave bruises he wouldn't notice until morning. If morning came. Behind them, in the garage bay, Monk crouched at the tunnel entrance and listened. Not to them. To the world above, the parking lot, the fence line, the tree line beyond. The silence outside was the wrong kind, not peaceful, loaded. The silence of a space that had been emptied of innocence and filled with intent. Raina's breathing echoed in the tunnel, fast, shallow. The breathing of a woman whose body was moving forward while every maternal instinct screamed at her to turn around, go back, put herself between her son and whatever was coming instead of crawling away from it through a pipe that smelled like a grave. "Mom." Cal's voice was barely a whisper. It bounced off the concrete walls and came back to him sounding older than it should. 30 more feet. How do you know? Monk said 63 paces from the fence to the clubhouse. The tunnel runs parallel. I've been counting arm pulls. We're at 41. Raina closed her eyes in the darkness and kept crawling. Above them, Rooster had the equipment trailer's hood up and was connecting jumper cables from a battery he'd pulled from the garage workbench. The cables were corroded at the clamps, green oxidation that flaked off under his fingers like dead skin. Oxidation. He scraped them with a flathead screwdriver, cursing under his breath in a continuous murmur that was half profanity and half prayer to nothing in particular, just the universe, just the mechanical forces that governed whether copper conducted or didn't. The battery sparked. The trailer's electrical system hummed to life. Dashboard lights flickered. The PA system mounted on the roof, 2 industrial horn speakers and an amplifier box the size of a suitcase, crackled with static that sounded like the clearing of a throat. Rooster keyed the PA mic. Static burst, then silence. Working. He pulled Darren's notes from his cut and unfolded them on the trailer's dashboard. His hands were shaking. He told himself it was the cold. It wasn't the cold. Inside the clubhouse, Gideon stood at the side door with his hand on the lock. Harlan was beside him, encrypted phone pressed to his ear, listening to a voice that spoke in clipped tactical shorthand. Coordinates, ETAs, unit designations that meant nothing to Gideon and everything to whatever shadow agency was burning asphalt towards Cedar Bluff. 12 minutes, Harlan said. He pocketed the phone. My team is 12 minutes out. Croft's reinforcements? Could be here in 8, maybe less. Depends on when he gives the signal. 8 minutes against 12, a 4-minute gap, 240 seconds of vulnerability during which the only thing standing between Elias Croft's network and an 11-year-old boy crawling through a drainage tunnel was a locked oak door, a chained front gate, and 4 men who had already given everything they had to give and were now operating on whatever was left beneath that. Gideon unlocked the side door. He didn't open it. He held the handle and looked at Harlan. When Rooster starts broadcasting, Croft will know we're not playing defense anymore. He'll signal his reinforcements immediately. That cuts our window. I know. And if your team doesn't make it in time, Harlan looked at him with those wet concrete eyes, then I'll be standing next to you when they come through the door. And that boy will be a quarter-mile down the drainage outlet, moving toward Route 9 with his mother. And the only people left in this building will be men who chose to be here. Gideon absorbed this. Chose to be here. 5 words that contained the entire architecture of everything the Iron Covenant had ever been. Not a gang, not a brand, not a social club with leather accessories, but a collection of broken men who had walked through the door of this clubhouse at various points in their lives and decided, for reasons they could never fully articulate, that this was the hill. He opened the side door. The night hit him like a wall. Cold, pine-scented. The sky was fully dark now, stars scattered across it like shrapnel frozen in mid-explosion. The parking lot was a field of chrome and shadow, motorcycles standing in their rows like monuments, their paint catching the faint glow from the clubhouse neon, their engines cold, their riders inside a building that was about to become either a fortress or a coffin. Gideon stepped onto the gravel. His boots crunched. The sound carried in the still air, carried far enough, he knew, to reach the tree line where Elias Croft sat in his vehicle with a laptop and a camera feed and 7 years of patience that were about to be tested. The tall stranger was still at the truck. The tailgate was down. The cases were visible. He was standing with his back to the clubhouse, but his posture had changed. The casual ease of the afternoon was gone, replaced by the rigid alignment of a man who was ready to move and waiting for the word. Gideon walked toward the equipment trailer behind the garage bay. He walked slowly, deliberately, in the open, under whatever camera was still transmitting from the tall man's jacket, under whatever scope or lens or night vision optic Croft had trained on the property. He walked the way he had walked every day for 30 years. Measured, heavy, controlled, predictable. Exactly the pattern Cal had warned him about. He reached the trailer. Rooster was inside, mic in one hand, Darren's notes in the other, waiting. Their eyes met through the trailer's open door. "When I get back inside," Gideon said, "count to 60, then start talking." "How long?" "Read all of it. Every name, every route, every contact, every GPS coordinate. Don't stop until you've said every word Darren wrote, and when you're done, read it again." Rooster looked at the notes, at the handwriting of a dead man who had tried to save them all and been rewarded with a disappearance that nobody had solved because nobody had been willing to look at what solving it would cost. "This is for him," Rooster said, not a question. "This is for all of them. Darren, Cal, every person who saw the truth and got told to wait until morning." Gideon turned and walked back toward the clubhouse. Same pace, same stride, same pattern. Croft would be watching. Croft would be reading his movements the way a chess player reads the board, interpreting each position, predicting the next 3 moves, calculating the optimal response. But Croft didn't know about the trailer, didn't know about the PA system, didn't know that in approximately 60 seconds, every piece of intelligence his rebuilt empire depended on, every name, every route, every hidden contact, was about to be shouted into the American night at a volume that would carry across a 1/4 mile of open ground and into the recording apps of every phone within range. Gideon stepped inside the clubhouse, closed the side door, locked it. He counted 45, 46, 47. Harlan stood at the bar, phone in hand, tracking his team's approach on a GPS display. Dutch was at the front window watching the gate he'd chained with a length of tow chain and a padlock from the garage. Bishop was somewhere near the east fence. Gideon couldn't see him, which meant he was doing his job correctly. 58, 59, 60. Rooster's voice exploded into the night. It came from the PA speakers on the trailer roof with a force that shook the clubhouse windows and sent a physical vibration through the gravel of the parking lot. Not shouting. Rooster wasn't shouting. He was reading, clearly, steadily, with the deliberate cadence of a man who understood that every syllable was a bullet and every name was a wound in an empire that had survived by staying invisible. He read the names. 5 circuit contacts the ATF had never identified. He read their state abbreviations, their phone numbers. He read the GPS coordinates of drop points spanning 6 states. He read the communication protocols, the hand signals, the concealed patches, the charity event staging methodology. He read Darren's annotations in green ink, the updates, the corrections, the notes in the margins that proved the circuit's network was not dead but dormant, not dismantled but rebuilt, not gone but waiting. He read Darren's final line. "They'll let you think it's over. They'll go quiet. They'll wait until you stop watching, and then they'll come back to the same place because the best hiding spot is the one everyone already searched." The effect was immediate. The tall stranger at the truck spun toward the sound. His hand went to his jacket, not for a weapon, Gideon observed, but for the button camera, as though he could somehow shut off the transmission by covering the lens. The second stranger at the east fence broke into a run toward the truck. The third, wherever he'd been hiding, appeared from behind the garage bay, moving fast, heading for the front gate. And from the tree line, headlights. 2 of them. piercing the darkness between the pines as a vehicle started its engine and lurched forward onto the county road. Elias Croft. Moving. Not toward the property, away from it, running, because the information that had kept his network alive for 7 years was now being broadcast at 120 decibels into the open air, and every second it continued was another second of exposure that no amount of planning could undo. Rooster kept reading. The tall stranger reached the truck cab and climbed in. Engine roared. The second man was at the passenger door, pulling it open. The truck reversed, tires spraying gravel, tailgate still down, the long black cases sliding and crashing against each other in the bed. The vehicle swung toward the front gate and accelerated. It hit Dutch's chain at 40 miles per hour. The gate buckled, the chain held. The truck's front bumper crumpled inward, the hood folding like paper, steam erupting from the radiator in a white cloud that caught the neon light and turned pink and blue. The engine died. The horn stuck, a continuous blaring note that merged with Rooster's voice from the PA speakers into a wall of sound that was equal parts alarm and testimony. Dutch was at the gate in seconds. He hadn't been at the window. He'd been behind the fence post, flat against the wood, positioned exactly where a man who'd spent 20 years riding lead position in motorcycle formations would position himself, upstream of the obstacle, ready to respond to whatever came through. The tall stranger kicked the truck door open and stumbled out. His face was bleeding, forehead cut from the steering column, blood running into his left eye. He looked at Dutch. Dutch looked at him. Neither man moved. "I'd stay in the truck," Dutch said. The stranger looked at the chain, at the crumpled gate, at the steam pouring from his engine, at Dutch, who was standing with his arms at his sides, perfectly still, projecting the specific calm of a man who had no intention of throwing the first punch, but absolute certainty about throwing the last one. The stranger got back in the truck. Rooster kept reading. From the east fence, Bishop emerged. He was moving differently now. Not the controlled, tactical stride of a man on mission, but the loose, adrenaline-flooded gait of a man who had just done something physical and was still vibrating from it. Behind him, near the northeast corner of the fence, the third stranger was on the ground. Not unconscious, not injured. Simply sitting in the dirt with his hands on his knees and his head down, the posture of a man who had been moving toward an objective and encountered an obstacle that changed his mind about the objective. Bishop reached the clubhouse side door and knocked twice. Gideon opened it. "Third one tried to go over the east fence," Bishop said. He was breathing hard, sweat on his forehead, his knuckles red but not bleeding. I explained to him that the fence wasn't that kind of fence. With what? With a conversation, a brief one. Rooster's voice continued from the PA speakers, now on his second reading of Darren's notes, the repetition transforming the information from intelligence into incantation. A dead man's words made public, made permanent, made impossible to silence or deny or bury under a bar for another 7 years. And then the sound, from Route 9, not from the west where Croft's reinforcements were supposed to come. From the south, multiple vehicles moving fast, the distinctive rumble of heavy SUVs running hot on county blacktop, accompanied by something else, a deeper, more rhythmic pulse that Gideon felt in his sternum before his ears registered it. A helicopter. Harlan's phone rang. He answered, listened, closed it. "My team," he said. 2 minutes. Gideon walked outside. He stood in the parking lot between the rows of motorcycles and looked at the sky. The helicopter appeared over the tree line, black against the stars, no running lights, only the red pulse of an anti-collision strobe that blinked like a heartbeat made visible. It swept over the property, its searchlight igniting the parking lot in white brilliance that turned every chrome surface into a mirror and every shadow into a hard black edge. 3 black SUVs came through the county road entrance, bypassing the destroyed front gate, mounting the grass shoulder and rolling into the lot with the organized aggression of vehicles that had done this before and would do it again. Doors opened before the vehicles stopped. Men in tactical gear stepped out. Not military, not police, something in between, wearing body armor and communication equipment that Gideon didn't recognize from any branch he'd served with. The operation took 9 minutes. The tall stranger and the second man were removed from the truck, cuffed, and placed in separate vehicles. The third man at the east fence was collected by two tactical officers who walked him to a waiting SUV with the polite efficiency of men who had been trained to treat suspects like paperwork, carefully, thoroughly, and without personal investment. Elias Croft was found 4 miles east on the county road. His vehicle pulled over by a second tactical unit that had been positioned on the other side of Cedar Bluff for reasons Harlan did not explain and Gideon did not ask about. The reinforcements from the rest stop on Route 9 were intercepted before they cleared the highway exit. Rooster stopped reading. The PA system went silent. The night, which had been filled with voice and engine and helicopter and the organized chaos of a federal operation, collapsed into a quiet so profound it seemed to have physical weight. Gideon sat on the clubhouse steps. He didn't go inside. He didn't check on the operation. He didn't speak to the tactical officers or answer questions or do anything that resembled leadership or authority or the careful management of crisis that had defined his life for 30 years. He sat on the wooden steps with his boots in the gravel and his hands hanging between his knees, and he breathed. Just breathed. Rooster found him there 10 minutes later. The older man lowered himself onto the step beside Gideon with the careful, painful descent of a 59-year-old body that had been running on adrenaline and unfiltered cigarettes for 7 hours, and was now presenting the bill. He pulled out a Camel, lit it, inhaled, exhaled. They sat in silence for a while. The helicopter had moved off. The SUVs were still in the lot, their engines idling, their headlights illuminating the destroyed front gate and the crumpled black truck, and the aftermath of an evening that had started with barbecue and ended with a federal operation that nobody would read about in tomorrow's paper. "Cal?" Gideon asked. "Monk found them at the drainage outlet. Reyna was halfway to a heart attack. Cal was holding his clipboard and asking Monk how the tunnel's hydraulic gradient worked." Gideon almost smiled. Almost. The muscles tried, but they had been locked in place for so long that the movement felt foreign, like trying to open a door that had rusted shut. Possible, but requiring more effort than the gesture was worth. "Agent Delgado's team arrived 8 minutes after Harlan's people," Rooster continued. "She's not happy about the jurisdiction overlap. She's also not happy about you broadcasting classified intelligence over a PA system at 120 decibels. Is she going to arrest me? She said she needs to process the evidence first. Darren's notes, the video from Croft's camera, the contents of the truck." Rooster took a long drag. "She also said she wants those notes, the originals. She can have them." Rooster reached into his cut and pulled out the folded papers. He held them for a moment. Darren's handwriting, the green annotations, the gas station receipt with the pencil map, all of it worn soft at the creases from 7 years under a bar and one night of being read aloud to the sky. "I should give them to her myself," Rooster said. "Darren would have wanted that. He didn't write them for a box. He wrote them to be read." Gideon nodded. They sat. The night cooled further around them. "You owe Bishop a conversation," Rooster said after a while. "I know. A real one. Not the kind where you say 10 words and expect the silence to do the rest. I know. He's a good kid, angry, justified, but good. He took that patch because he believed in what you said this club was. You need to make sure what you said is still true." "Is it?" Rooster finished his cigarette. He crushed it on the step between them and left the butt sitting there, a small gray ruin on the wood, final and ordinary. "Ask me again in 6 months." Headlights swept across the lot. A civilian vehicle, a battered sedan that Gideon recognized before it stopped. Reyna's Honda Civic, the check engine light visible even from 50 feet away. That persistent orange glow on the dashboard that had been burning since before Reyna started working at the clubhouse, and would probably be burning long after all of this was a memory she told Cal not to talk about at school. The car stopped near the side door. Reyna got out. She stood beside the Honda with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. Not from cold, but from the delayed physiological response of a body that had been in survival mode for hours and was now processing the backlog of terror it had been deferring. Cal got out of the passenger side. He was dirty, knees black with tunnel grime, elbows scraped raw, flannel soaked through at the chest from crawling through standing water. He was holding his clipboard. Of course he was holding his clipboard. He walked to the clubhouse steps. He stopped in front of Gideon. The two of them looked at each other in the dim light. The scarred president of a motorcycle club that was about to face the legal consequences of its own history, and the 11-year-old boy who had set the entire evening in motion by noticing what no one else had bothered to see. "You okay?" Gideon asked. "I'm wet," Cal said, "and my elbows hurt, and I think I left my backpack in the garage." "We'll get it." Cal stood there for another moment. His face was doing something complicated, the tightening and loosening of muscles that happens when a child is trying to decide whether to be brave or to finally, after hours of being brave, allow himself to stop. He stopped. The clipboard fell from his hands. It hit the gravel with a flat clap that sounded like the period at the end of a very long sentence. His face crumpled, his shoulders folded inward, and then he was crying, not quietly, not with the controlled composure he had maintained since the black truck first pulled through the gate, but with the full, devastating, uncontainable force of a child who had been carrying a weight that no child should carry and had finally found a place where it was safe to set it down. Raina was there in 2 steps. She dropped to her knees on the gravel and pulled him against her, wrapping her arms around him the way she had in the clubhouse, except this time there was no danger outside and no tension inside and no reason to be quiet. Cal sobbed into her shoulder. His body shook. His hands gripped her jacket with the desperate strength of a boy who had spent the evening being a tactical analyst in a pattern recognition engine and a human surveillance system and was now, finally, remembering that he was 11 and scared, and he wanted his mom. Gideon watched them. He didn't look away. He sat on the steps and watched a mother hold her son in the gravel of a parking lot at 9:47 p.m. On a night that had started with barbecue smoke and ended with the dismantling of a weapons network and the unraveling of a 7-year lie, and he felt the thing he had been refusing to feel all day. Not guilt, which he'd been carrying so long it had become structural, but something beneath the guilt, something older and more fundamental. Grief. Not for Darren, though that was there too. Grief for the years he had wasted protecting a lie instead of honoring a truth. For the brotherhood, he had compromised by treating his brothers like subordinates instead of equals. For the man he might have been if he'd opened the box 7 years ago and read Darren's notes and made the call he should have made and accepted the consequences he should have accepted. Grief for the version of Gideon Cross who had died on Route 9 alongside Darren Voss, because a part of him had disappeared that night too. The part that believed he was the kind of man who did the right thing, and he had spent 7 years pretending it was still alive. He let the grief come. He didn't fight it. He sat on the wooden steps and let it move through him the way weather moves through a valley. Slowly, completely, reshaping the landscape without asking permission. Agent Delgado found him there 20 minutes later. She was shorter than he expected, 5'4", dark hair pulled back, a face built for patience and precision, wearing a windbreaker over body armor with ATF printed in yellow letters that caught the neon light from the clubhouse windows. She stood in front of him and looked at him the way she probably looked at every case file that crossed her desk, with the controlled assessment of a woman who had learned to separate the person from the problem without losing sight of either. "Mr. Cross." "Agent. I have Darren Voss's notes. I have video evidence from Croft's surveillance equipment. I have 4 suspects in custody and a 5th being transported from the county road. I have the contents of the truck, 4 cases of modified military hardware that match the circuit's historical profile. And I have your recorded confession, which you helpfully broadcast over a public address system to ensure I couldn't possibly miss it." "You're welcome." The faintest hint of something crossed her face, not a smile, more like the recognition that the man sitting in front of her was not what his file had led her to expect. "The notes," she said, "they document your club's activities alongside the circuit's routes." "They do." "You understand what that means?" "I do." She looked at him for a long time. Behind her, the tactical teams were loading equipment. The helicopter had returned, hovering over the tree line, its searchlight sweeping the county road in slow arcs. I'm going to need you and your officers at the federal building in Billings on Monday morning. All of you, with counsel. We'll be there. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Cross. What you gave me tonight, the circuit intelligence, the names, the routes, that has significant value, but it doesn't erase what's in those notes about your own operations. Those are separate matters. They'll be handled separately. I understand. She studied him one more moment. Then she nodded, turned, and walked toward her vehicle. At the door, she paused. The boy, Cal, he's the one who identified the operatives? Yes. 11 years old. Yes. Delgado looked across the lot to where Reyna was still kneeling in the gravel, holding Cal. The boy had stopped crying. He was leaning against his mother with the exhausted stillness of someone who had emptied everything out and was now waiting to see what would fill the space. He's got a future in this work, Delgado said, if he wants it, when he's old enough. Tell his mother to call my office. She got in the vehicle and drove away. The lot emptied slowly. The tactical teams left. The helicopter banked south and disappeared. The destroyed truck was loaded onto a flatbed by a tow crew that arrived at 10:30 and left by 11. The front gate, bent and hanging from one hinge, was propped open with cinder blocks. The gravel was churned and muddy from tire tracks and boot prints, and the general aftermath of an evening that had compressed an entire war into 6 hours. By midnight, the only people left were the ones who belonged there. Gideon sat at the bar. Rooster sat beside him. Dutch was in the corner booth, asleep, his head tilted back against the wall, his mouth open, snoring with the deep, rattling regularity of a man who could sleep anywhere because he'd learned to sleep in places where sleep was not safe and had never recalibrated. Monk was in the garage bay doing something quiet with a wrench that probably didn't need doing but gave his hands a reason to move. Bishop was outside, sitting on his motorcycle, not riding it, just sitting, staring at the stars with the expression of a man who was having the conversation Gideon owed him inside his own head first. Reyna and Cal were on the old couch near the jukebox. The couch was leather, cracked, held together with the same stubbornness that held together everything in this clubhouse. Cal was asleep. His head was in his mother's lap. His clipboard was on the floor beside the couch. His sneakers, the left one still held together with duct tape, were hanging off the edge, too small to reach the cushion properly. Reyna was awake. She was running her fingers through Cal's hair, the slow, repetitive motion of a mother who was not soothing her child, but soothing herself, using the physical reality of his presence. Warm, breathing, alive, here, as evidence against the scenarios her mind kept generating about what could have happened. Gideon poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot Rooster had made at 11. He carried one to Reyna. She took it without looking up. "Thank you," she said. The words carried more than gratitude for coffee. They carried the weight of a woman who had spent 3 years being dismissed and diminished and overlooked by every system designed to support her, and who had just watched a roomful of scarred, broken men risk everything they had, their club, their freedom, their lives, to protect her son. "You're staying here tonight," Gideon said. "Both of you. Garage apartment upstairs. It's not much, but it locks. We can go home. You can. But you won't sleep, and neither will he. And this place, whatever else it is, whatever the ATF decides it is on Monday morning, right now, tonight, it's the safest building in Cedar Bluff. Because right now, tonight, every man in this room would stand between that boy and anything that came through that door." Reyna looked at him. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face drawn, her hair tangled from the drainage tunnel. She looked like a woman who had crawled through the earth with her child and emerged on the other side into a world that was exactly the same and completely different. "Okay," she said. Gideon went back to the bar. Rooster had poured himself a whiskey, the good stuff, from the bottle that lived on the top shelf behind the broken clock. He was holding it, but not drinking it, turning the glass in his hands, watching the amber liquid catch the neon light. "Monday," Rooster said. "Monday. Whatever happens. Whatever happens. They sat with that. The word Monday carrying inside it all the possible futures, courtrooms, plea deals, probation, prison, the dissolution of a club that had existed for 30 years and served as the only family some of its members had ever known. All of it waiting at the end of a weekend that hadn't started yet. Gideon? Yeah. The mug. The one your daughter gave you. Gideon looked at the drain rack where the world's okayest dad mug sat upside down, washed and dried, placed with the same precision he applied to everything. What about it? Call her. Not Monday. Not next week. Tomorrow. Call her and tell her what happened tonight. Not the circuit. Not the ATF. Tell her that a boy walked into your clubhouse and you chose to protect him, even though it cost you everything. Tell her that's who her father is. Tell her that's who he's always been, even when he was making the worst decisions of his life. Gideon stared at the mug. 4 words printed on ceramic by a daughter who had stopped speaking to him because she had watched him choose the club over everything else for so long that she concluded she wasn't part of everything else. She was. She had always been. He had simply never found the language to tell her because the language of protection was not the language of presence. And a man who spent his life guarding others often forgot to show up for the people who didn't need guarding, who just needed him to be there. I'll call her, he said. The night wound down in the way that all long nights wind down, not with a defined ending, but with a gradual loosening, a slow release of the tension that had held everything taut for hours, like a fist uncurling one finger at a time until the hand was open and empty, and resting on the bar top with nothing left to grip. Bishop came inside at 1:15. He walked to the bar. He looked at Gideon. Gideon looked at him. The conversation they needed to have was visible in the space between them, a debt of truth that would take more than one night to pay. But Bishop pulled out the bar stool and sat down, and that act of sitting, of choosing to be in this room at this bar, beside this man, said more than either of them was ready to say with words. Rooster poured him a whiskey. Bishop drank it. They sat in the silence of men who had been through something together and hadn't yet decided what it had made them, but knew it had made them something different than what they were before. At 2 a.m, Gideon walked outside. The parking lot was empty. The neon signs behind the bar windows cast red and blue light across the gravel, painting the chrome of the motorcycles in colors that looked like the inside of a bruise healing. The air was cold. The stars were bright. The tree line was dark and still and ordinary. Just pines, just shadow, just the edge of a world that went on beyond what any of them could see. He sat on the steps. The same steps where he'd sat when Raina first told him about the patches. The same steps where Cal had looked at him across 70 feet of gravel and barbecue smoke, and they'd made a contract without words. He pulled out his phone. Scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 4 years, his daughter's name on the screen, Jess, with a contact photo that was outdated by 3 haircuts and a lifetime of distance. He didn't call. Not yet. It was 2 a.m. and she was sleeping and tomorrow was soon enough. But he held the phone and looked at her name and let himself feel the full weight of everything he had lost and everything he might still recover if he was willing to be the man that tonight had required him to be. Not the president, not the protector, not the one who carried everything alone, but just a father, imperfect and scarred and overdue, calling his daughter because a boy with duct-taped sneakers had taught him that the bravest thing you can do is not stay silent when everyone tells you to wait. Inside the clubhouse, Cal shifted in his sleep. His hand fell from the couch and brush-paid the clipboard on the floor. His fingers curled around its edge, held it for a moment, then released it. The clipboard settled on the hardwood. The metal clip caught the neon light and held it. A small, bright point in the dark room, steady and sharp. The last flicker of an evening that had asked everything of everyone and been answered by the only currency that mattered. Not strength, not violence. Not the roar of engines, or the weight of leather, or the mythology of dangerous men. Just the willingness to see what was there, to say it out loud, and to stand beside the people who believed you when no one else would. In the parking lot, a single Harley engine cooled in the night air, ticking as the metal contracted, a slow and steady rhythm that sounded, if you listened closely enough, like the heartbeat of a house that had finally stopped holding its breath.